Kristen Mackey. I am the Community Relations and Outreach Program Manager for WA Cares at DSHS. And you can see on your screen here what we're going to cover in the webinar today. Even though most of us will need long-term care at some point in our lives, it can be really tough to talk with our loved ones about it. We often don't want to think about there being a time when we or our loved ones will need that kind of support. And it can be even harder to accept when someone has already reached a point where they need more help. So to avoid the difficult feelings that come with these conversations, many families skip talking about long-term care until there's an urgent need. And there was a poll released by KFF this week that showed that fewer than half of adults say they've ever had a serious conversation with a loved one about who will take care of them if they ever need help or how they'll pay for care. But the problem with that is that waiting to talk about long-term care until someone's in urgent need of help can make an already emotional and difficult situation even more painful. And so with holidays coming up and many families gathering, we know that you may have an opportunity to start a conversation with your family members about long-term care. So today we have a fantastic panel joining us who are going to walk us through how to approach these conversations and share some really helpful resources with you. And we hope this discussion will be helpful both for those who want to talk with loved ones about plans for their own care and those who are trying to plan for their loved ones' care. So let's get started with some introductions. We're going to start with KD, who's going to be sharing some personal experiences with these family conversations. KD.
Absolutely. Hi, my name is KD Hall. I'm the Communications and Marketing Director for King County Library System. Part of the reason why I really took this job back in March was because of the ability to be able to work across our region and work with individuals from birth to the most aging populations. And that's really what we do here at KCLS. I'm happy to be here and talk with you all. Thank you so much for letting me introduce myself.
Thank you. And next we're going to go to Christina, who's going to be covering general tips for these conversations and what to consider when you're talking about care with some advance notice. Christina?
Good morning, I'm Christina Ramirez. I'm the Community Services Manager for one of the local AAAs in Washington, the Area Agency on Aging and Disabilities of Southwest Washington. My start in this industry was with Family Caregiver Support Program, and I also have a personal background in family caregiving. So I'm happy to be here today as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And then we'll go to Lynn, who's going to talk about how to have these conversations and what to do when your loved one is maybe already experiencing some signs of dementia, which can cause extra difficulty when trying to have conversations about care. Lynn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Cordy, Aging and Long-Term Support Administration, and I'm part of the State Unit on Aging, which is a part of Home and Community Services in Aging and Long-Term Support Administration. And I am the Dementia Care Program Policy Manager. So I work on issues related to Alzheimer's and dementia and work on the coordination of our Washington State Plan to address Alzheimer's and dementia, as well as the Dementia Action Collaborative that's implementing that state plan. So I'm just happy to be here today and look forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much. So for our audience, you are welcome to go ahead and send in your questions as they come up for our panel to answer later in the webinar. Just click the Q&A button on your screen and send in your questions at any point during the webinar. These slides and a recording of the webinar will be posted on our website at wacaresfund.wa.gov/webinars later today. And Sam, if you can maybe drop that link in the chat for folks, that would be great. So we're gonna start by defining what we're talking about when we say long-term care or caregiving. Long-term care is help with activities of daily living like bathing, eating, dressing, preparing meals, grocery shopping, and more. It does not include medical care like doctor's visits and treatment for medical conditions. Long-term care covers a broad spectrum of needs and circumstances, including for younger people who have been unexpectedly injured or become disabled or ill. And a lot of people don't realize how many different services and supports are included when we talk about long-term care. We often think of it as care in a residential setting, like a nursing home or assisted living, but it can also include care provided in your own home. And in fact, most people with long-term care needs can stay in their own homes with the right support. It's also very common for family caregivers to not realize that they are a caregiver. You might go to your mom's house a couple times a week to cook meals, drive her to appointments, make sure she's taken her meds, all of which are common care activities. And the majority of this type of care is provided on that informal basis as unpaid care from a family member, a friend, or a neighbor. And while we are defining terms, we also want to acknowledge that sometimes people end up in a caregiving role for a family member with whom they have a complicated relationship. We also know that many people have loved ones who might not be part of a traditional family structure. So we're going to be using both loved one and family member throughout the webinar to mean any relationships you might have where there may be a responsibility for care at some point in the future. And with that context in mind, I'm going to go ahead and launch an opening poll with some questions about your experience with long-term care and caregiving and what you're interested in getting out of today's webinar. So if you can take a moment to answer the questions on your screen, that will help us tailor our remarks and our discussion. I'll give you just a moment to go ahead and fill that out. Okay, give you just another minute. Thank you, everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and share those results. So you should be able to see on your screen that we have got a lot of folks with some experience with long-term care, either working in long-term care or providing unpaid care to a family member or a loved one. But we do still have a pretty good chunk of people who say they don't have experience and aren't very familiar with long-term care. We do have some folks who are already comfortable having these conversations, so that's great. And then it looks like we've got slightly more people who are looking for help starting a conversation with a loved one about plans for them to receive long-term care in the future, as well as some folks who are looking to have conversations about their own plans for long-term care. And lots of folks who are very familiar with walk cares, as well as quite a few that are somewhat familiar. So hopefully the walk cares overview that we're going to do later on will be helpful as well. Thank you all for participating. That's really great information for our panel to have. And now I am going to hand it over to KD to start our panel remarks.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I wanted to share just a little bit about caregiving and how sometimes you may not even fall into caregiving with your natural role. I'm a communications person, a marketer, a filmmaker, and back during the pandemic in 2020, my mother-in-law was experiencing rapid decline in her mobility. She ended up having a stroke, and she was at home in Detroit in her own home with her husband. And so me and my husband were in Washington State, and we kept getting the calls 5 o'clock in the morning, 5 p.m. at night. And I just looked at him and I said, you know, David, we've been gone from Detroit for about 15 years. We were military. I said, I think that if your mom's going to have a good shot at the rest of her life, we need to take over her care. And so we did that. It wasn't an easy decision. We have very young children, a 5-year-old and 8-year-old, and one of them have also a medical situation as well. So it was not easy. However, when we looked at how could we make this work? And that was part of the reason why we brought her out to Washington. Currently, she lives in our home. She has her own space, and she has caregivers that comes into our home 6 days a week and work with her. And what I would say is that when we were asking her about this, we've been dating since we've been 15, so I've been knowing this mom for a long time. They never really prepared and prepped for it. And what I would say, my experience now being a 41-year-old professional with children of my own and now helping to take care of my mother-in-law is very, very important to have those conversations before you get to that point where it's absolutely needed. Another thing to really consider too is the cognitive delays, the depression, and how it impacts your overall house. I'm a communicator, so we're always happy and excited. And with very young children is keeping that certain level of energy in the home so that they can learn and thrive. There are a lot of challenges, with having someone in your home, love them or don't love them. There's challenges that come with that. However, when you have programs such as Washington Cares and you find the right type of caregivers, those type of programs will help assist keeping people into the home. And so I talk about some of the negatives, but let's talk about some of the positives. We have 3 generations living in one household. My children get an opportunity to speak with an older boomer every single day about what her life was like as a child. The stories that she's able to share with her grandchildren are invaluable. And even when we do transition her over to an actual facility, which eventually with MS, we need to do that because there's certain type of care that we just can't give her in the home, especially when she becomes totally where she can't move anymore, immobile. I think there's a lot of positives too. It's the storytelling, it's the laughter, her being able to engage with the children. And so I just wanted to share that story that yes, it's both challenging and there's also beauty in it. And what we try to do, one of the biggest things like with the mental delays is we try to ensure that we have family members calling in. And so we have a schedule. That's something that simple makes a big difference. Okay, her husband's back in Detroit. You need to call her every Sunday. Her other son, you need to call her every Saturday and make sure that your kids are calling her on Thursdays. Even if you're the actual caregiver, I think that it's very important that you have a strategy. It's just like business in some ways. You have to have a strategy. If you don't have a strategy, it could be very tiresome. And then it can cause a lot more issues in your home. So that's my personal experience with caregiving. I think that my children are learning to look out, take care of members outside of themselves. So the leadership that is building in a 5-year-old girl and an 8-year-old girl as they're helping to care for their grandmother, bringing her food, talking to her is invaluable. And we have a aging population and people are going to continue to age. And so one of the things that I'm doing today is I'm making sure that I have my AFLAC coverage. I'm making sure that I have my long-term disability coverages for even myself as I'm 41 years old. And I'm thinking, hey, in 40 years, I will probably be in that same exact situation where I'm going to need caregiving. How do I make it easier for my children? How do I make it easier for my grandchildren where it doesn't become such a heavy task? And so I think that in some ways, I look at this as a blessing because it's helping me and my husband plan for our future.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. We really appreciate that. And next we are going to go to Christina.
Great. Well, Katie, what you shared really aligns well with some of the comments that I will share as well. It builds upon nicely the advice and the personal experience that you've had. So wanted to take some time to talk about what to consider when having conversations about plans for future long-term care needs. So if we want to go to the next slide. One of the things that you want to do is just assess your personal situation and possible need for long-term services and some support. And this may be you're assessing for yourself, but it also may be family caregivers who are coming together to start to assess what's happening with the person that you're already caring for. And you want to think about what support you or the person you're caring for may need to maintain health and independence. And that's going to look different for each situation. But the thought is, as Katie said, you want to be thinking about it ahead of time before you're in crisis mode. You want to be proactive versus react. I would say that you want to consider what is the financial circumstances and how might that change. So is there a plan in place for how you might pay for long-term care, whether it's going to be in-home or whether it would be in a different care setting? Are there benefits that are in place that might help that? Are you aware of what programs and supports are available in your community that might support that, whether it's through your local area agency on aging or other organizations that might be able to provide support? You also want to have you want to think about, do you have family or other informal support that's available to provide care? Sometimes in the situation that we just heard about, there's family involved in providing that care and there's family, but in this situation, you heard that they were in essence doing long distance caregiving until it came to a point in which they brought Katie's mother-in-law to live with them. And so providing care in their home and just understanding what that might look like. Oftentimes in my personal experience, what I see is sometimes people who are needing care really struggle to reach out to family and say, I need help. They don't want to come across as imposing is often what I hear them say, or bothering their children. And so family will want to be aware of what's going on and offer, perhaps be proactive in offering help or expressing your desire to be there and provide support. And then also considering what are the local resources available. this may be something that we've never thought about in, prior to this conversation, but really taking time to understand what's available in your community. And care looks different. It doesn't always mean in a residential care setting. It may very well look like care at home. And so I would suggest that your local area agency on aging is a great place to start. One of the programs that they typically offer is an Aging and Disability Resource Center. And that's a great place to start because they are constantly updating resources to understand what's available and be able to share that with you. Oftentimes those resources can be programs that are offered through the Area Agency on Aging, but also other community partners who might be providing services. And the services are an array. Some of them are free services, some of them are low cost, and then some of them are, typical commercial cost levels. But understanding what the resources are and what aligns well to your particular situation is helpful to know. Next slide, please. So tips for starting the conversation in your family and managing some of the discomfort. A couple thoughts to keep in mind is appreciate why it's so hard. Whether you're the person who's needing care or that you're providing care. If you're the person who's providing care, oftentimes this conversation may coincide with a person losing some of their independence. And that can be a difficult hurdle to address. And if you're the person who is needing care, obviously, there may be a perception of you don't want to burden or impose upon your family. But by the same token, oftentimes that family is aware that you may need some help and may be wanting to help and just don't know how to reach out and offer that yet. You want to remember that the consequences of not speaking up are usually worse than the talk itself. So if you're able to start that conversation before the care needs happen, that's a great place to start. It's really difficult to start a conversation either when you're in crisis mode or when you're at end of life, right? Whether you're a caregiver or the care receiver. So you want to be proactive. I know in some of the advanced care planning work that I've done in the past, there was a school of thought that Thanksgiving weekend is a great time to start having conversations because typically families have gathered and it gives you a chance to maybe to start to normalize that conversation and have a placeholder for those conversations. It's usually not one conversation that you have, it's a series of conversations. So providing that space and normalizing what is it that you want and hope for in your in the care as you get older. And then being able to convey those wishes and for people to be able to think about how they may be able to help contribute to that. But just being thoughtful about where you might be able to begin those conversations. Consider that the person you're caring for might be having similar concerns. Again, spoke to that a little earlier. It's just, everyone may be thinking the same thing and just not sure how to bring up the conversation. Think about gains and not losses. So often I associate this with the idea of maybe you've come to a time where the person you're caring for, it's no longer safe for them to continue to drive. And so staging that conversation so that it can be as positive as possible. So maybe, talking about how do we sustain their independence and access to transportation, but maybe it transitions from them driving to what types of supports can be put in place so that they can remain independent. Whether that is maybe the grandkids are going to stop by and run errands with them, or maybe it's reaching out to transportation services or engaging in senior transportation through the Area Agency on Aging. So understanding how to have the conversation where you support the gains or maintaining independence versus the losses that might be a concern for the person who's receiving care. And again, thinking about how can the conversation be staged as choices versus ultimatums. From this perspective, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to contribute to the conversation. Sometimes that might be limited if the person who's receiving care has cognitive limitations, but whenever possible, the person who's receiving care should be a part of the conversation and a part of the planning. And then just being mindful of the right moment at the right place. I think it's helpful too when you're organizing this type of meeting with family is to have some thoughts in mind about what it is that will be discussed. Maybe even sharing that in advance with the people who will be at the meeting, so they have a time to think about what does that mean for them, so that when they come to the table or to the meeting, that they've had a little bit of time to process. You want to be candid, so really being truthful about what the concerns are, but also empathetic, making sure that you can understand where that person may be coming from. And then it's helpful to use I statements. And that's, I think, that's typically how we want to approach conversations that might be difficult or challenging. These are just a few ideas, but if you really want to take a deeper dive into how you might prepare for conversations, I've listed the data resources that I refer to and kind of pulled some of these suggestions from. And so you can take it, they're easy to search online and pull up that information. AARP has a great section specifically for caregiving. And then Family Caregiver Alliance, again, has great resources available to you for education and having conversations. Next slide, please. So I wanted to walk through a few resources that may be helpful. You heard me mention your local area agency on aging. And so in the slide deck, these links will connect you to these resources. But when you go to, it's called WACLC, it'll help you find your local area agency on aging. And within that, you're going to be able to find information about long-term care services, in-home care, supports for family caregivers, community supports, and other residential settings, as well as information about Alzheimer's and dementia. It'll help you connect to your local area agency on aging, to Developmental Disabilities Administration, Home and Community Services, and your local VA. And then it will also help you connect to community-based resources such as nutrition, transportation, and in-home care services. I think sometimes it's just overwhelming of where to start, and your area agency on aging is a great place to start in helping you to navigate what's available in the community. If you were to visit the Aging and Long-Term Support and Administration's Family Caregiver Resources page, what you would learn about is local or information about caregiver education, long distance caregiving. So when you perhaps are living here, but maybe mom or dad is living, in Denver, you'll be able to understand, how you can provide support long distance. It'll talk about self-care as well as day-to-day care of the care receiver, how you can become a paid caregiver. There's also you'll see a T-Care Personal Care Survey. And that actually is a survey that family caregivers can complete, and it helps them to understand how they may be dealing with family caregiving and also offer recommendations of supports that might be available to them. For the Elder Care Locator, that's a national public service resource that helps connect you to services for older adults and their families. And it's this is a helpful example if you live here and are helping a family member that lives in a different state, or maybe you have a friend who is telling you about, hey, it's really hard as I'm caring for my parents. You can go to Elder Care Locator and find resources that might be available in their state. With AARP, again, they have a really great section all dedicated to family caregiving. And when you go to that particular site, you'll find just basic caregiving tips, as well as information about care at home, financial and legal resources, life balance, as well as information about medical care. And then finally, if you go to the Family Caregiver Alliance, some of the things that you will find there is the ability to connect to other caregivers. I think so often people feel isolated, and maybe that they're the only ones going through this, and it really is helpful to be able to connect and communicate with other caregivers. I think that support groups are another great way to do that. Not only are you going to find a community that can be supportive, but oftentimes they have the best tips and suggestions about how to continue to provide care. At the Family Caregiver Alliance, you'll also have access to education as well as caregiver-specific resources. And then you can also access their research and policy. I think some of the strongest advocacy for family caregivers comes directly from family caregivers, because you are walking the walk and talking the talk. But it's helpful to understand where we are at the national and state level around family caregiving and what the opportunities might be to advocate to expand those resources. Thank you. I'll pass on to Lynn at this point.
Great. Hi again, I'm Lynn, and I am going to carry on. Those were great tips and suggestions, and a lot of the things that I want to say can build on what both Katie and Christina have shared. So I am just going to start adding in a little bit more awareness around some of the issues that you might be facing if a person in your family or yourself have memory loss or dementia, and how that can complicate and sort of impact the conversations and decisions that you have to make about long-term care. So if we go to the next slide, what I do first want to address is this, this issue of, when do you need to be concerned about memory loss? And, it is one of the big concerns that we hear all the time. I think Alzheimer's is considered, it's one of the top 2 most feared illnesses, and one of the most feared illness among people who are older adults. So, it's really common to worry about, those signs of memory loss, or, that their person's memory or thinking is changing. But what's really interesting, and this echoes something that was said at the beginning of this, we also know from both national and state surveys is that people don't even often talk to their own healthcare provider about memory loss or changes in thinking. In fact, we know that less than half the adults who reported that their memory or thinking changed in the last 6 months have talked to their healthcare provider about it. So it's worth considering for a moment, why aren't people talking to their healthcare provider? Well, the first answer, of course, is, well, nobody really wants to find out they have a diagnosis of dementia, right? There's that denial that comes into play, that sort of resistance to going beyond that. But there are other reasons, like, some people think, it's dementia. If it's dementia, there's nothing I can do about it. They can't cure it. So why would I want to know? Why should I bother going through all those tests? Some people worry that they're going to be treated differently. This sort of lingering stigma, people aren't comfortable talking about it or letting people know. Or they might just think that this memory loss is a part of getting older. But we're trying to do a little more education and clarifying for people around that, because first, it's important to know that some memory loss or changes in thinking happen for reasons other than dementia. So there are some reasons that can be reversible. Issues with medications, interactions, certain medications can just have impacts on your thinking. Changes in thyroid, metabolism, some vitamin deficiencies, other emotional reasons like, a clinical depression or really, stress or depression can also cause some confusion or some memory loss. So it's important to know if somebody has memory loss that's getting worse, it's important to look into it. Why is it happening? Even if it does turn out to be dementia, and it may, it's better to know early, because as with any chronic conditions, when you know early, there are more opportunities to make an impact on how it progresses and the experience of the people around you in how it progresses. So it really is very important to recognize that when there are changes in memory and thinking, that you get a medical checkup. So what kind of changes should you worry about? And that's where this sort of differentiation between normal aging and, when do you be concerned? So if you look at this slide, typically memory loss that starts disrupting daily life, changes in planning or problem solving, difficulty in completing certain tasks at home, confusion with time or place, trouble understanding visual images or spatial relationships, new problems with words in speaking or writing, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps, decreased or poor judgment, withdrawal from work or social activities, or a change in mood or personality. So those are some of the warning signs, but there's a couple things to keep in mind here. First, we do know that there is some mild forgetfulness that happens with age. All our organs in our body change as we get older, and that includes the brain. So it may take a little bit longer to come up with, say, new words, to learn new things, or to remember some of the information as well as we did in the past. But these are typically sort of mild changes, and they don't impact your ability to do the regular everyday activities that people need to do. So, you might forget what day of the week it is or someone's name, but you remember it later, right? Or, you might lose things. I lose things. I'm sure everybody loses things from time to time. The question is, do you find it later? Can you retrace your steps? You might miss a monthly payment. I've missed a monthly payment when I had a really stressful year last year. Is it getting worse? And the next question to think about is this different for the person? So for example, somebody who was really good at math and then has trouble now doing math or balancing a checkbook. Somebody who was really good at playing bridge or cards, whatever card game they have, and now they can't follow the rules. Well, if somebody, one of these things about poor judgment, that's one that people say. Some people have always had poor judgment, right? So just because they're older and have poor judgment doesn't mean they have dementia. So you have to sort of look at what was typical for the person. Is it changing, and is it getting worse, right? So those are just some things that you might start seeing as warning signs. So what do you do about it? And, this is the important thing. And we go to the next slide. The most important thing to do as an action when you start noticing these kind of changes, of course, is to have a health assessment, a medical assessment. That just for the reasons I've mentioned, you want to know that there's maybe something going on medically that you need to do something about. And if not, if it does turn out after tests to be dementia, it gives you more of a runway, more time for planning and doing the things you could do to help with the progression of the condition. So, I think what's really important is that regardless of whether it turns out to be dementia or not, it can be a good time to trigger some action on your behalf. So, for example, it's really important that adults, for everybody, all adults should be thinking about healthcare planning documents, right? A healthcare directive called a living will, an advance directive, a durable power of attorney for somebody to make decisions if you can no longer make them. Completing this general durable power of attorney. So if something happens that you cognitively can't make certain decisions for yourself, that somebody is appointed as your health agent to make those decisions. Completing an estate plan. What do you want to have happen to your estate plan? So these are sort of things that require cognition, right? And so even if you have not done them already, even if you get a diagnosis of dementia, if you get it early, you could still do some of these things. So you are going to be wanting to talk to an attorney and getting some help, potentially, depending on what you have to do. But it's really important at this point, if you're starting to see some changes, don't put it off any longer because we just can't say what's going to happen in the future. So I think, the most important things when you start seeing these changes is to get a medical assessment, see what you're dealing with, make sure you're getting some of your paperwork in place. And then the other thing I'd say, and Christina had already mentioned this, talk to somebody in your family about it. This is what's happening, because you might need support with some of these things and some of the steps that you need to take, both emotionally or practically speaking. So let's go to the next slide. And, we do have some tools and resources available to help people who are dealing with this. And this is a really, has become a very popular document called the Dementia Roadmap, a guide for family and care partners. And I want to bring it to your attention because those action steps come directly out of that Dementia Roadmap. And I just want you to be thinking about the fact that this is all compiled. It's nicely put together so that you could follow along depending on what stage your person is in. So if we go to the next slide, and I was going to ask if one of the folks could put that link into the chat, but the way this is set up, if you looked at this, we have sections about that whole worried and wondering, I'm seeing changes. What do I do now? How do I move forward with this? On through mild cognitive impairment, and then through the later stages of dementia. And at each stage on this booklet, we're going to talk about what you can expect, what you can do to help the person, and what you can do to help yourself as a family caregiver. And, if we go to the next slide, what you'll also notice is, in these sections, we have it sort of clearly delineated. It's easy to digest, sort of walking through different steps that you might take. So I just want to bring your attention to that and have you thinking about how you might use this resource as you move forward, because I don't know any of you in the audience, different stages. People come to us in all different stages, right? This document really focuses on not the things that you can't control, but focuses on empowerment and the things that you could do. If you see warning signs, if you're having trouble having the conversation, it provides some links, some ideas and resources, similar to what Christina said, but from that sort of dementia lens, and how you might be able to have those conversations. So if you go to the next slide, again, I'm just pointing out to you some of the things that you'll find in the dementia roadmap. And I wanted to take a moment on this page, on one of the pages of mild cognitive impairment. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because people are sometimes confused, what is mild cognitive impairment? So really the distinction between mild cognitive impairment and dementia is that in mild cognitive impairment, you might be seeing changes in memory or thinking, but you can still do your daily tasks, right? You can still get through the day. It's not impacting your ability to do the things you need to do. So once it starts impacting your ability to take care of your everyday tasks, that's when people start getting concerned about the fact that it could be dementia. But what's important to know is that some people with mild cognitive impairment go on to have dementia and progress into dementia, but some people don't, because some people it's due to things that either are reversible or the situation changes. So again, this is another one of those reasons, in that mild cognitive impairment stage, you shouldn't put it off. If you're starting to see those changes that you or other people are noticing, again, we're going to recommend as an action is to talk with your healthcare provider, let them know what's happening. Is it getting worse? What are you noticing either about yourself or potentially about a loved one? And this booklet helps you sort of have some questions to ask, some ways to have this conversation. So I think it's empowering, and I think it could be helpful to those of you who are heading into conversations and sort of just wanting to know what are some, steps we could take and not feeling deflated that we can't have these conversations. So it empowers you to know a little bit more. So if we go to the next slide, I want to build on some things that both Katie and Christina have mentioned, because one of the things we talk about in this booklet, this is included in the roadmap, so I'm not going to read through the whole thing because you could do that on your own. But what I do want to highlight is that communication can be a little tricky, right? You want to have maybe some complex discussions. And you need to be able to both convey what you want in a helpful way, but also understand what the person wants if you're trying to have a conversation. So, it really varies along the spectrum of dementia, sort of what stage they're at. I'm going to assume for a moment that we're in those more early stages to have some of these conversations. And I want to highlight some of the communication tips here. They sort of build off of what you've already heard. One of the more important things in having this conversation, even if the person has memory loss and you're trying to discuss long-term care options, it's really important to show respect. Don't make assumptions that they can't understand. Assume that they can understand. You might have to speak a little more slowly, try to keep things really simple, but don't exclude people with memory loss from a conversation. This is their life and they have their values, some of which hopefully you've had some conversations about over time to clarify what kind of things they would want or wouldn't want in the future. So be sure to show that respect for the abilities. They might not be able to clearly articulate them as well as you want, but they have their opinions and their thoughts. So, try to include people in those conversations. And again, the other thing is to allow time to both listen and for them to respond. Sometimes their response time might be a little bit lower. You might need to just sort of take a little time, let them think about it and process. And when you're listening, what I want to say in listening is listen, not only with your ears, but with your eyes and with your heart, because you have to really focus on the feelings that a person might be trying to convey. So people who are experiencing memory loss, they might feel very vulnerable. So they might be particularly sensitive about this idea of maintaining independence, what that means to them. What does independence mean? What are the things that they value? So you have to really sort of listen for the feelings behind what they're saying. They might not articulate it totally clearly, but listen for those feelings, what's important to them, validate their feelings, have that empathy that Christina was mentioning, with that understanding that this is a really vulnerable time for them as well. And I think it's really important to watch your tone and manner. And that could be hard if you're already living with somebody who's maybe asking repetitive questions. You've had to have a lot of reminders. No one likes to feel vulnerable. No one likes to be talked down to or criticized. And that's really hard when you're having to repeat things over and over. It's just, I think we just have to all come at this from, if this were me, and making sure that in our communications, we're using those I messages that Christina mentioned. I'm concerned about this because I feel scared because. So I think you can try to use both that empathy, validating feelings, and listening, wholly as people are talking. And there is a really useful document, and I was going to ask folks to put this in the chat. It's called the Conversation Project, and it's a whole toolkit. And I just wanted to remind you, going into this weekend, if you are having some conversations, it's designed to talk about your advanced care planning wishes, but it provides some really useful tips on having that conversation, some of which echo some things Christina was mentioning around, finding a good time to talk, making sure that you've allowed that time. Don't try to do it when you're on the way to the store, find a quiet time to have a conversation. If somebody has cognitive impairment, it's really important to do, have the time and the heart and the patience to have that conversation. And then the other thing I want to point out to you in terms of resources is on the next slide. I mentioned about how it's important in those early stages. You might not be jumping to, looking at alternatives for long-term care right now. You might want to focus on the medical, assessment, doing your legal planning. Here's a couple resources for that legal planning. And I just wanted to point them out to you because people are often at a loss, like, where do I get started? So here is a legal toolkit, and it's really designed to help you understand a little bit more about, who can do this and what help you can get. On the right-hand side, you see this legal planning project. And this is something we got funded by our state legislature to help people who need help doing their durable powers of attorney healthcare directives. And we have some pro bono attorneys lined up across the state who are willing to provide consultation in the completion of these forms. It's free for anybody 60 and over, or anybody, and persons of any age with dementia can access this free legal help in completing these important documents. So we just wanted you to be aware of that as a resource, because this can help down the line. And on the next slide are a couple other resources we just wanted you to be familiar with, because we find that very often people are having a hard time communicating with their health provider in a really meaningful way. And health providers sometimes need, a partnership. You need, as a family caregiver or a person with dementia, sometimes to be really working together. And there is this training. Again, this is free and it's online for families. How can you create that partnership with your provider to get the best care? And it provides a lot of easy tools for communicating, some video scenarios to help you have some of the conversations with your provider. And I think that can really help as care goes on. And then we have this other toolkit. If you are somebody who has a person who's living with dementia in your family and you want to provide some extra safety, there's some tips in here about driving, things that we've already talked about, like driving, thinking about safety in the home, those types of things. So there's some tips and some resources for you there. And then on my last slide here, I'm going to echo some things that Christina mentioned. that, really there are resources out there. People living with dementia can live in the home for quite some time. Even after a diagnosis, people can live independently or with the help of families for quite some time. And it's really important, though, to be accessing the information, some education, some resources to help with that. Of course, every situation is going to be different. We know that the ability to stay in the home is going to depend on family support, on the person's cognition, of course, their safety, whether they have that family to help them, their finances, the ability to access those supports. But it is going to be more challenging over time. If a person has dementia, Alzheimer's or other dementia, and it is progressing, a family role can be to sort of keep tabs on the changes, and having had conversations beforehand, as Christina mentions, is much easier. For example, we find a lot of families, if they are just in a stressful situation, there's been a hospitalization, and all of a sudden they want to start looking for a placement. Well, if you'd been, thinking about that before, what I always advise families along the way, as they're like going to support groups, listening for what kind of places might be good in your community. What kind of services are people using? I mean, I'm a firm believer, as Christina mentioned, in recommending families use support groups, because that is where you get the honest information about people's experiences. And you learn about these tough conversations or some really creative solutions that, you otherwise wouldn't know about. What have real families done? So I'm really a firm believer in that, and reaching out for support, and about finding out from other families what has been useful, what has worked for them, how have they worked their way through challenges, and even finding good physicians, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing we're always struggling with. Oh, this family had a really good physician, that I might want to consider. So I'm a firm believer in reaching out for all the support you can, and doing it early when you're not in crisis. I often recommend, I did this with my own family because my siblings were in 3 different states. And when my parents were aging, I had asked, my brother, let's go and see 3, when I would visit, let's identify, a couple places that if there's an emergency, we would consider as a good option for my family member to go to if she had a fall, if she needed to be somewhere. So sort of not, it's sort of like, you plan for the worst, but hope for the best, thinking ahead what might happen, and have some services, resources, and information in your back pocket early on to make everything more comfortable as time progresses. So with that, I just wanted to leave you with these resources that, were up on the screen, and I'm sure you'll be sent those in the slides as well. So I'm going to stop now and we can open it up to your guys' questions.
Thank you, Lynn. We actually are going to go ahead and do our quick overview of WACARES before we go to Q&A. But thank you so much to our panel for some really great insights and resources. So now let's talk about WACARES, since it is, as a new long-term care program for Washington workers, something that is important to keep in mind when doing long-term care planning. So WACARES is an earned benefit, which means you contribute for a certain number of years to qualify for benefits. It's entirely self-funded by worker contributions, which go into a dedicated trust fund that's used only for this program. Workers contribute 0.58% of every paycheck to WACARES, and you can see here what that looks like for the typical worker who makes just over $50,000 a year and would contribute $291 each year, or about $24 a month. You only contribute to WACARES while you're working. Contributions stop when you retire or if you become unemployed. And everyone is covered at the same rate, regardless of pre-existing conditions. And when it comes time to claim your benefits, there are no copays or deductibles, and you don't need to file claims or front payment for services. Instead, we connect you with contracted providers who offer the services that you want, and we pay them directly. Contributions to the program began in July of this year, and benefits will become available in July 2026. This is what those contributions can look like over the course of a career, and that typical worker income you can see is just about at the level in green here in the middle. And you can see that $290 in contributions each year totals out at about $8,700 over 30 years. So let's talk a little bit about who contributes to WACARES. Almost all Washington workers will participate in the program. We use Many of the same definitions as paid family and medical leave, including the definition for whether you count as a Washington worker. So a really good rule of thumb, if you're an employer or even if you're just someone trying to figure out if you're contributing to walk cares, it can help to figure out whether you are already participating in paid leave, because any workers who are contributing to paid leave would also contribute to walk cares unless they have an approved walk cares exemption. The workers who are automatically not included in the program include those whose work is not localized in Washington and federal employees, and those workers don't need to apply for an exemption. Employees of tribes are only included if the tribe has opted in, and self-employed people are also only included if they opt in. There are also some other groups of workers who can get an exemption, which they need to apply to the Employment Security Department to get. Some workers can apply for an exemption that's based on meeting and continuing to meet certain conditions. So this is including workers who live out of state, temporary workers with non-immigrant visas, and spouses or registered domestic partners of active duty military. And these are available on an ongoing basis, and you must continue to meet those criteria to maintain your exemption. There are also two types of permanent exemptions. One is for veterans with a 70% or higher service-connected disability rating. And these are folks who have some access to nursing home care through the VA. Those applications are also available on an ongoing basis. And then finally, there was also an exemption available for workers who had private long-term care insurance before November 1st of 2021. These applications are no longer available, but under current law, any workers who already have an approved private insurance exemption will continue to be exempt permanently. If you are self-employed, you can choose to opt into walk cares and protect yourself with the same affordable benefits that are available to other Washington workers. Like other workers, you would contribute 0.58% of your earnings, including your net earnings and any gross wages that are paid to you by your business. And to earn benefits, like other workers, you need to work at least 500 hours per year, which we calculate by dividing your gross annual wages by the minimum wage in the state. So if you're interested in opting in, there's more information available on our website at walkcaresfund.wa.gov/opt-in. You can see that's on your screen as well. And let's talk about benefits. So there are two requirements that you have to meet in order to access walk cares benefits. And the first is a contribution requirement. So that's the three pathways that you can see on your screen here. The first pathway that someone might use in order to meet their contribution requirement is a pathway for workers who have not yet earned lifetime access to their benefit, but have a care need either while they're working or soon after they leave work. And so to qualify for this pathway, you must have contributed for at least 3 of the past 6 years at the time that you need benefits. And then the next pathway is lifetime access. And this is the pathway that we expect the majority of Washington workers will use to qualify for benefits. So to use this pathway, you must contribute for 10 years without a break of 5 or more consecutive years. And then finally, we have a special pathway that is just for people near retirement. So these folks are unlikely to be able to qualify for the 10 years pathway, and they are able to earn 10% of the full benefit amount for each year that they work, and have access to that, whatever percentage of the benefit amount that they've earned at any time that they need care. Once workers have met that contribution requirement and need help with at least 3 activities of daily living, you can get access through walk cares to a $36,500 budget for services and supports. And that benefit amount increases over time with inflation. Walk cares is really designed to help folks stay in their own homes as long as possible. So you can choose the services and supports that meet your needs. That might mean residential care in a setting like a nursing home, but it could mean in-home care, or it could include things like home modifications to make your home safer, or assistive technology for things like medication reminders and fall detection. Walk Cares has many options as well to provide support for family caregivers. So you can choose someone who would otherwise be caring for you on an unpaid basis to get training and be paid, even your spouse. And through that, Walk Cares can help lessen the impact on family caregivers, either by paying them for their time or making sure that they can get other support services. And we get asked a lot about how far that benefit amount will go. It won't cover 100% of care for everyone, but it would cover the amount of in-home care that the average Medicaid client uses right now for roughly a year. About a third of people only need care for a year or less. So for those people, Walk Cares may be able to cover all the care that they need, depending on what services they choose. And for others, Walk Cares provides the family with immediate relief and some time to plan for future care costs if you haven't already had these conversations and made a plan for care. And you can see some examples on your screen of how someone might use your benefit, including paying a family caregiver and getting some care supplies, making home safety renovations, getting some equipment and weekly meal delivery, or getting a part-time caregiver, transportation to appointment, and other things to help you out if you need temporary support after an accident or an injury. And now we are going to open up. We've only got a few minutes left, but we are going to go ahead and open up for any audience Q&A. And it looks like the first question that we've got is from someone saying they're a service provider and recently had a family requesting services for their Spanish-speaking member with dementia, and asking about any resources or activities in the Puget Sound area. Lynn, do you have any suggestions for?
Well, I was going to ask where this person was from, what area they live in.
Like Puget Sound.
I don't know if I can answer that.
It looks like just Puget Sound. I don't know specifically.
Okay. The reason I asked that is because the Alzheimer's Association chapter in Seattle does provide some Spanish. Pardon me?
Looks like Snohomish County.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that the Alzheimer's Association can serve folks up there. They do have a Spanish language program for Seattle, King County, where they can provide some information and support. So you might want to contact them and see what they can tell you about what is available in Snohomish. So the Alzheimer's Association, you can get to them by ALTSWA. I'll put it, let me see, I can put this in the, oh no, I can't answer that. It's basically alts.org and then /ALZWA, ALZWA after that. Or you can just call the Alzheimer's Association in Seattle and find out what they have. The other thing I would do is have them call the Area Agency on Aging. Again, we had provided the number to reach out to them in Snohomish County, and they would let you know what they have for Spanish language services. I don't know, Christina, do you have anything to add to that?
I know it may not be activity-based, but because things are so accessible virtually, I think starting with the two suggestions that you offered, there may be some education at least, or support groups, or something that's available in a virtual space, as well as written publications that are available in Spanish. So just some thoughts for consideration about the virtual space as well.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, and that is all we've got time for, but it looks like we don't have any other questions in the Q&A. So hopefully this discussion was helpful for folks. I know there were a lot of really great resources that were shared. And so as a reminder, you can find recordings and slides from today's webinar, as well as all of our previous webinars on our website at wcaresfund.wa.gov/webinars. And in addition to today's materials, you might want to check out our last webinar last month, which dug into more detail on making a long-term care plan. And then if you still have questions for us, you can feel free to reach out to us. You can contact us using the email form on our website, or contact us by phone at one of these phone numbers, depending on the topic of your inquiry. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And everybody have a great afternoon.